Good morning, everybody. We are in the middle of a very famous drama, All My Sons, by Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller, 1915 to 2005, is an American playwright and an essayist in the 20th century American theatre. Among his most popular plays are All My Sons, 1947, Death of a Salesman, 1949, The Crucible, 1953, and A View from the Bridge, 1955. He wrote several screenplays and was most noted for his work on The Misfits, 1961. The drama Death of a Salesman has been numbered on the short list of finest American plays in the 20th century. He is very well known for his very wonderful play All My Sons that has established him as a dramatist in the American theatre. Let's look at the characterization that you could find in the drama All My Sons. The very first character is Joe Keller. Joe Keller, a middle aged factory owner of working class background, he is a plain, inarticulate man with a certain peasant shrewdness. His values are simple work and family. His purpose in life is to pass on his business to his surviving son, Chris. His moral simplicity, however, is his undoing. During the World War II, he knowingly authorized the shipment of cracked cylinder heads to the Army Air Force. The defective parts caused the deaths of 21 pilots. Although imprisoned and brought to trial, he avoided conviction by shifting the blame to his hapless partner, Steve Deva. Although he is accepted by his neighbors, they do not doubt his guilt, nor did his son Larry, who, ashamed of his father's actions, committed suicide during the war. Only his son Chris believes he is innocent. Joe is forced to face his responsibility when Larry's former girlfriend, Ann Deva, now about to marry Chris, gives the Kellers Larry's suicide letter. Realizing that his actions caused Larry's death and that 21 pilots are as much as his sons as Larry himself is, he refers to them all as all my sons in the end of his speech. Joe shoots himself. The next character that we could find is Kate Keller. Kate Keller is 50-ish wife of Joe Keller. She superstitiously clings to the hope that her son Larry, who disappeared during the war and is assumed to be dead, will definitely return. This false hope complicates her surviving son's plans to marry Ann Deva. To Kate, accepting the marriage means that Larry will never come back. She therefore opposes the marriage and tries to get rid of Anne. Her denial of Larry's death is rooted in her knowledge of her husband's guilt. In her mind, Larry's death is linked to the pilot's death. Denying the reality of his death is her way of denying her husband's responsibility for the death of the others. Her denial is shattered away, however, by Anne, who, to save her future happiness with Chris, reluctantly shows her Larry's suicide note. Chris Keller is the next character. Chris Keller is Joe's 32-year-old sensitive and intellectual son. He works for his father's company, which someday will be his. A World War II veteran whose combat experience has left him with a strong sense of responsibility for others, he is an idealist, though rather naive. He loves his father, causing him to ignore his suspicions about his father's guilt. He loves his mother, which casts a shadow over his desire to marry Anne. He is forced to choose between family responsibility and his moral idealism, which transcends family concerns. Unlike his father, he acknowledges obligations beyond the family. When confronted with his father's guilt, his moral idealism demands that he rejects his father, which drives Joe actually to suicide. The next character in the Keller family is Larry Keller. Along with Chris, Larry also serves the American Army during the Second World War, and he was a pilot of the fighter plane. When Larry comes to know of the reality of Joe to be responsible for killing 21 pilots of the fighter planes, he feels highly humiliated and so purposefully commits suicide by crashing the plane, the secret of which is revealed only to his lover, Anne. The next family that we have here in the play is the Deaver family. The very first character is Anne Deaver. Anne Deaver is an attractive 26-year-old daughter of Joe's former partner and neighbor, Steve Deaver, whom she has not seen since his imprisonment. She was once Larry's girlfriend, but now is in love with Chris, who invited her back to her old neighborhood so he could propose to her. Her desire to marry him over Kate's objections causes her to reveal Larry's suicide note to Kate as a means of proving that Larry is dead so that Kate would allow Anne to marry Chris. George Deaver is the next character. George Deaver is Anne's impulsive and short tempered brother. A lawyer, he comes to the Keller's home after visiting his embittered father in prison and realizing that Joe has destroyed his father. He tries to dissuade Anne from marrying Chris. He is almost reconciled with the Kellers, but Kate inadvertently reveals that Joe authorized the shipment of defective parts. He again asks Anne not to marry into the family that destroyed their family. When she refuses, he leaves. Steve Deaver is Anne Deaver and George Deaver's father and the partner of Joe Keller. In fact, it is Joe who has committed the crime of supplying the defective parts to the aircraft, but is forcibly kept on Steve Deaver, and Steve Deaver actually is in prison experiencing the imprisonment. The next family that we could find is the Bayliss family, Jim Bayliss and Sue Bayliss. Jim Bayliss, a doctor and Keller's neighbor. His idealism is periodically encouraged by Chris. Like Chris, he must choose between family responsibilities and other greater values. He would like to do medical research but cannot support his family on the salary it would pay. Although he is a successful doctor, he has compromised his idealism. A close friend of the Kellers, and particularly of Chris, he has guessed Joe's guilt long back. Sue Bayliss is Jim's wife, a practical, witty woman approaching the middle age. She is threatened by Jim's stifled idealism. She too is aware of Joe's guilt and finds Chris' idealism shallow. She asks Anne to not live close to them after she marries Chris. So Chris will no longer encourage her husband's interest in medical research. Lube family is the next family that we could see in the play. Lydia Lube and Frank Lube constitute the Lube family. Lydia Lube, a one-time girlfriend of George Deaver and now the wife of Frank. She is a vibrant, beautiful woman who laughs easily. Her brief reunion with George at the Kellers shows how she too has settled for less than the ideal. She is a living reminder to George of what he lost when he went away to war. George is her reminder that she has married someone foolish and second rate. Frank Lube is her husband, who is foolish, insensitive, and blading haberdasher, who is Lydia's husband. Although only 32 years of age, he managed to avoid military service in the war. He foolishly encourages Kate's superstition fueled hope of Larry's return by presenting her with a horoscope proving that Larry did not die because the stars were favorable to him and the day he was reported to be missing. His marriage to the vivacious Lydia during the war reveals that he, like Joe Keller, profited while others died. So, All My Sons is a play by Arthur Miller in which the Keller family is haunted by the memory of eldest son Larry, who died during the World War II. Chris Keller invites his deceased brother, Larry's former girlfriend, Anne, to the Keller home for dinner. He intends to propose to her in the first act. Anne's father, Steve, is in prison for selling faulty plane parts, which lead to the deaths of 21 pilots. Chris' father, Joe, was Steve's business partner, but Joe was exonerated because of his bad health. Through a series of confrontations, the second act sees George Deaver coming back and charging Joe for being guilty. Joe's complicity in shipping out the faulty parts is revealed in the end in the third act, as a result of which Joe commits suicide out of guilt. All My Sons concerns the conflict between the pragmatic father and his idealistic son. Joe Keller, the father, is a blue collar industrialist and a self made man in the American society. Motivated by an extreme sense of loyalty to his family, Joe allowed the defective airline parts to leave his plant, an action that killed 21 pilots and led to the arrest and imprisonment of his partner and friend, Steve Deaver. Joe seeks to escape the past, to deny the fateful series of events that threatened his business, his family, and his freedom. On the other hand, Chris, his son, finds it impossible to escape the past. During the war, Chris discovered a unique brotherhood among the men who sacrificed their lives for each other, a kind of responsibility, man for man. On his return home, he finds no meaning at all in the shallow upper middle class concerns or in the consumerism of post war America. Chris even thinks the past a liberating agent. He judges the lives of his friends and family, and more important, the truth against the standard of his combat experience. This conflict operates on two levels, the human as well as the social. At the social level, Miller's play explores the need for the individual to accept social responsibility. On the human level, the play reveals the tragedy of a common man. Joe Keller is not a coward, nor does he act from base self interest. Chris is relentlessly honest and a loyal son, yet both are destroyed by their family to see life realistically. Keller places his family's well being above the lives of 21 innocent pilots, and Chris's loyalty to an abstract idealism is ultimately destructive. Although he proclaims that the truth will set them free, Chris makes several choices in the play that reveal his unconscious knowledge of his father's guilt, his difficulty in proposing to Anne, his rejection of the company's new name, and his dreams of leaving the area and making his own way in the world. Both father and son are problematic characters. Their choices, neither corrupt nor noble, allow Miller to explore the result of their actions rather than causes. The other characters in the play are less well defined, nevertheless, they support what some believe is Miller's idea for survival. To face the often ugly reality of life, Anne and Sue, Jim Blaze's wife, negotiate life on an everyday business. Sue points out the contradictions and dangers inherent in Chris's idealism. Chris makes people want to be better than it's possible to be. Kate, the sentimental mother who keeps alive an ideal image of her dead son, is not as successful as either Anne or Sue. Knowing the guilt of her husband, she has retreated into a world of horoscopes and memory. Jim, the wary physician, has abandoned his dreams and yielded to practical demands. These tensions and conflicts give depth to Miller's play, allowing the playwright to explore both the human and the social dimensions of its central and moral crisis. Now, let us look at the various themes that are depicted within the drama. American Dream is the first dream that is depicted in the drama. In a sense, All My Sons is a critical investigation of the quest to achieve material comfort and an improved social status through hard work and determination. In the Horatio Alger myth, even a disadvantaged, impoverished young man can attain wealth and prestige through personal fortitude, moral integrity, and untiring industry. Joe Keller is that sort of self made man, one who made his way from blue collar worker to factory owner. However, Joe sacrifices his integrity to materialism and he makes a reprehensible decision that sends American pilots to their deaths, something he is finally forced to face. The next theme is atonement and forgiveness. Paradoxically, Joe Keller's suicide at the end of All My Sons is both an act of atonement and an escape from guilt. Atonement is to justify whatever thing has happened in the past, and forgiveness. It stems from Joe's realization that there can be no real forgiveness for whatever has had happened. The alternative is confession and imprisonment. Death offers Joe another alternative. Forgiveness must come from Kate and Chris. The letter written by Larry reveals that he deliberately destroyed himself during the war, profoundly shamed by his father's brief imprisonment for fraud and profiteering. It is a devastating irony that Joe's initial attempt to do right by his family, resulting in fraud and the death of 21 fighter pilots, leads to destruction of his world. The next theme that we could find is of choice and consequence. As it is said, when you make a choice, you also choose its consequence. All My Sons employs a pattern that is fundamental to most tragedies. Protagonists in tragedy must, in some degree, be held accountable for their actions. When faced with a moral dilemma, they often make a wrong choice. Joe, at a critical moment, elected to place his family's finances above the lives of courageous American soldiers. The revelations that lead up to Joe's tragic recognition of guilt and his suicide, the final consequences of his choice, are essential to All My Sons. There is a sense of ache, a tragic necessity that makes and moves the work along towards its inevitable moment of truth and awful but final retribution. The drama also has the theme of duty and responsibility. Success always should be with duty, obligation, and responsibility. Joe Keller's sense of duty and responsibility is to the material comfort of his family and the success of his business. At a weak moment, under pressure, he puts these values ahead of what should clearly have been higher duty, his obligation to human life. His fear of losing lucrative government contracts, essentially his greed, blinded him to the murder of his committing his duty and responsibility with greed and selfishness. The theme of ethics runs throughout the drama very beautifully. Ethics always talks about right and wrong, with principles, honesty, fairness, responsibility towards the right side, and choice, selfishness, greed towards the wrong side. The drama is a beautiful conflict between right and wrong. Joe's decision to send defective parts is not merely a result of skewed values, it is a serious breach of ethics. Joe does not fully comprehend how serious a breach it is. To him, success is more important than anything else, including human life and the good of his country. By setting up his ethical situation, Miller clearly questions the implications of a value system that puts material success above moral responsibilities to others. As a result of this compromise, the theme of guilt and innocence runs throughout the play. When each begin in innocence, all of us in fact begin with innocence, maybe sometimes end with guilty. So guilt and innocence runs throughout the play. In All My Sons, there are hints that Joe is troubled by his guilt, even by his eventual suicide. His suspicions of Anne and George Beaver reveal his fears of being forced to face the truth. Even when he attempts to atone for his guilt by helping his former partner, Steve Deaver, as well as Deaver's son George, his offer seems rather lame given the enormity of his guilt. There is no way he can atone for the deaths of the American fighter pilots, however, something that he finally realizes. As a result of which, the theme of punishment runs in the drama. Joe's death at the end of All My Sons is paradoxically both punishment and an escape. In one sense, Joe can do no less than pay for his crime with his life. It is not an attempt or an empty gesture. It is made abundantly clear from the play's beginning that Joe is a man who is full of life and cherishes his roles as both husband and father. When the truth comes out, Joe has to face not only a return to prison but also the alienation of his remaining son and the destruction of his family. Death offers the only escape from that pain. It may also be seen as a sacrificial act, one which saves Joe's son Chris from further humiliation. as a result of which the play ends with the theme of death. Death of Joe. The key in the tragic arc of All My Sons is Kate Killer's refusal to accept the death of her son Larry. Initially prone to false hopes, it seems that she is in denial. Finally, it is revealed that her need to believe that Larry is alive allows her to avoid the terrible consequences of her husband's deeds. She realizes that if Larry is dead, then Joe is responsible for his death, something Larry himself confirmed in his letter to Anne. All along, Kate knew her husband's guilt, but desperately avoided it, knowing that it would destroy the entire family. Another interesting theme that runs in the drama is the revenge. The revenge that is of George Deva against the Keller family. Fueled by his anger over Joe's guilt, George Deva comes to the Keller's house seeking revenge and retribution. He is a major catalyst and intensifies the emotional tension of the film. For a moment, Kate's friendliness and warmth placate him. When towards the end of the play of the second act, Kate inadvertently confirms the probable truth of his father's accusations. George's anger also returns. Joe is then forced to reveal his fraudulent and deceitful acts. The main themes in All My Sons are responsibility, death, and the shattering of the American dream with the revenge. We also see that responsibility, death, and American dream are highly important themes reflected in All My Sons. Chris learned about personal responsibility in combat, whereas Joe allowed his financial obligations to his family to overwhelm his morals. By means of death, both Joe Keller and his son Larry commit suicide out of guilt for Joe's actions. Joe's suicide is figured out as an act of repentance, a way for him to accept responsibility for the deaths he caused. And the American dream is Joe Keller is a self made man who allows his greed to lead him astray. His suicide represents the often self destructive nature of the American dream. Thank you very much for joining me in this video that analyzes the very beautiful drama All My Sons by Arthur Miller. Bye for now.